Today I'm going to talk about political correctness and the issues it can create between people, sometimes forced upon them by the media. The definition of political correctness I'm using you can find on the top of Google if you want to type it in. The avoidance, often considered as taken to extremes, of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. What I'm going to use as a backdrop for this is this video, which you can find on YouTube, called EDL leader Tommy Robinson takes on rapper Akala. The show that Tommy Robinson finds himself on is named BBC 3 Free Speech, which is why someone is fine in saying something like this, because it's under the guise of free speech.
Do the panel think it would be a good idea to take Tommy Robinson and Anjum Chowdhury and put them on some kind of island and bomb it with anthrax?
Now this may not be a kind thing to say, but he has his opinions, and as a part of a civilized society we must respect them. It is really as simple as that. Now just as a reference, the BBC has a weird history with free speech, especially over these last few years, and since it's one of the only places where I can get the news about my local area, I've found it quite disheartening. A few examples of this are not very egregious because they always frame them as questions. If you ever see a controversial subject on the BBC, you will realise the writer or presenter will frame it as a question, even if some of the writer's opinions err to only one side of the issue. It's labelled as a question, opened up to interpretation. All you have to do is go to their website and see it everywhere, especially in the magazine section. So here's an example of what I'm talking about, and the link will be in the description for you. It's a really good video to illustrate the issue of people criticising an ideology somehow equals criticising the people following it, but of course it doesn't. Another way the BBC has had issues with free speech is to just be silent about issues. Now this could never be a criticism of any privately owned news corporation, since they can technically print whatever they want, but the BBC is a publicly funded company, funded by the British taxpayer. It is something, as a British person, I would like to opt out of, but I've got no choice. It's illegal to not pay your TV licensing fee. Therefore, there must be some accountability to the common person for their outcome. It is a good system when it's not being abused. The issue with such a system is that we are humans and we have faults. The way I try and explain it is how communism, on paper, is a wonderful idea in a utopian way. But the issue inherent in any communist country are the people. The reason for this is we all fall victim to greed and wanting to better ourselves. Now, are these desires bad? Not necessarily, but without them we could technically have a completely equal society. This is the same issue I have with the BBC. The BBC should be unbiased. It should always play the devil's advocate to ideas, not to promote them or a way of thinking, but to give voice to ideas which may be unheard so the general public can make their own minds up. This is a great system on paper, but the inherent issue once again is the people, because nobody can be unbiased towards everything, so even if you are told to ask certain questions, you can spin them one way or another, or insinuate one way of thinking is the right view, therefore the supposed wrong view is shouted down. I see this over and over again with the BBC. And when they are not able to find a way to spin something, so it is positive, in their right way of thinking, they simply don't report it. Some examples of this are when David Cameron allegedly screwed around with a pig's head. The BBC was silent. Here's a link to a write-up I did which can explain it better than I can right now. And how they handled the Rotherham rape gang incident, which was absolutely deplorable. Not just from the BBC, but everyone involved, including the police, the politicians, and the other news outlets, all being silent on an issue which had been happening for over 10 years. If you read that article and are not sickened by how everyone in power acted, I will be very surprised. And then you get this. BBC host Dotun Adebayo, a man paid by the British taxpayer to do his job on the radio, and he is claiming it never happened. And if you want even more damning evidence of the era of silence we live in, where if something doesn't fit your worldview, we shouldn't talk about it, here is an article stating that a teenage girl was raped by a gang of Syrian migrants in Newcastle Park. And that a police source told the Mail on Sunday, the BBC, had been informed 4 weeks previously in early May, when the teenage refugee had been arrested and charged. This is awful. Not just if it was from privately owned news organisations which wears its agenda on its sleeve, but it's from the BBC, which makes this even worse. So back to the point. Where does political correctness fit in? First of all, we have to look at Tommy Robinson, and here are some links to interviews he's done in the past. If you only have time for one, I'd watch the video he's done with Sargon of Akkad, where he's actually allowed to speak. It's a classic example of an establishment which will tear someone down who has a dissenting opinion. If you read any news articles, or watch any videos where he is present on the BBC or in the mainstream newspapers, they label him as a racist, but can never point to anything he has said which is racist, apart from falsehoods. The same thing could be said of any man who is accused of rape, because of the way the general public perceives accusations. An example of this is Jian Ghomeshi. He was found not guilty of sexual assault and acquitted of all charges against him, but because of the media buzz surrounding the event, people had it stuck in their minds that he was a rapist and that was that. It even triggered hundreds of people to march on the police headquarters in Toronto after he was found not guilty. He never raped anyone according to the law of the land, but because of the news outlets who ran the stories as if he had, painting him in a terrible light, people believed that he had done it before he had even had his day in court to defend himself. It is disgraceful that people can act this way and treat the accused as if he has been found guilty once the accusations have been made. This is the same story as Tommy Robinson. Here is another clip from the video.
What have I said that's racist?
You are a racist.
What have I said that's
bigot.
racist?
You're a racist.
What have
bigot.
I said?
Now compare this clip to the one I showed before and look at the crowd reaction. The general public reaction to two separate parts is so different because you can see a difference in what people see as the majority opinion and a minority opinion. The majority opinion is that Mr. Robinson is a racist. His response, please show me where I've said anything racist. And they can't because he hasn't, but because of the news surrounding him and his movement at the time, people perceive him to be racist, just like Jian Ghomeshi supposedly being a rapist. This is mob justice mentality, the same mentality which burned people as witches and creates incidents such as the UVA rape case hoax. This is where political correctness unfortunately goes. It makes the majority opinion, or what is perceived to be the majority opinion, and makes any other opinion invalid because it disagrees with it. It also shuts down any talk of a dissenting opinion, because it is not the majority opinion, since if it was the correct opinion, it would be the majority opinion and we go in circles and circles. It gets rid of facts which are contradictory of the majority opinion, so it's never questioned, and therefore is always right in the eyes of the public. It's dangerous. One of the great ways we grow as individuals, or as a human race in general, is by questioning the norm. Because by questioning it, we can either reaffirm what we think is correct by studying the idea more and coming out to the same conclusion, or our view can be changed once we do a bit more research into it and realize that it's not what we were told it was. It is why debates and arguments are necessary, and political correctness destroys that idea. It destroys the right of an idea to be questioned. It destroys the debate of ideas, and it means that most will read blindly from the news and hold the populace opinion because they are told it is a correct one. That is frightening to me, because it sounds like a precursor to the actions of the novel by George Orwell, 1984. The only solution I can see to stop this happening is by teaching in schools or just the general public critical thinking skills. When I was at school and university, I took many different classes and courses, focused around chemistry, physics and maths, but the most valuable two classes I see, which were instrumental in how I view the media and the world, was an introduction to critical thinking when I was 16, and a UNIV course, which was at university, where I learned about the idea of sustainable technological growth and how it will matter in the future. Critical thinking should be mandatory, because it's not a natural skill we have as humans. Otherwise, presuming someone to be guilty before their trial and mob justice would not exist. It's a flaw in our framework which needs to be fixed by education, and hopefully it is, but I doubt it will. It's easier to lead a flock of sheep than to have prove your worth as a shepherd. So at the end of this, I'd recommend to read the articles I've linked to sources, and also just have a parting word which will hopefully instill some thought. What's your opinion on Bill Cosby? Thanks for watching.